that when I'm not excited, get home. But this has been a great week. And it's been very strengthening for us. We want to thank you for your hospitality and for the invitation to come and work alongside you this week. We thank you for every kind word, every word of encouragement. And we thank you for showing up and for participating and for your thoughtfulness and for the work that's going on here behind the scenes. It takes a lot to make a week like this happen. And your sacrifice, even if it's unnoticed by people, it is not unnoticed by God. And so thank you for everything and everyone this week that has made this such a great week. We're going to close this series of studies with a study on worship. And we'll be taking our reading from John chapter 4. We alluded to this conversation this morning where Jesus encountered a woman from Samaria. Jesus was trying to help this woman see some things in her life. And one of the things that he mentioned to her was, go call your husband. And she said, well, I don't have a husband. He said, you are correct. You've had 5 husbands. And the man that you're with now is not your husband. And once he said that, it must have convicted her because she, like a lot of people, started a religious debate. And so this was sort of a detraction or a deflection from what Jesus had just said to her. And she said, let's have a conversation about worship. And she said, our fathers, that is our ancestors, worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where we ought to worship. Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. If you think about this statement she makes, you may encounter things like this, where someone says, well, you believe this, and we believe this, so who's right? And Jesus didn't fall into that trap. He answers the question, but he first wants to point her attention to something. She wants to focus on the where of worship. Where should we worship? Is it okay to worship in the mountains? Or do we have to worship in Jerusalem? And Jesus will answer her question in a moment, but you notice what he says. He said, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. So he said, there will come a time when that will not be relevant. And then he says to her, you know not, or you do not know what you worship. You know, if you think about it, if you don't understand who it is that you worship, the where really doesn't matter. If you don't know the what, the where is irrelevant. And that's what he's pointing out. You're all concerned about the where of worship. You don't even know who God is. And so let's start there. And notice as Jesus reveals to her subtly who the object of our worship is, he doesn't use the word God. He points her to the Father. 3 times in this, he says, worship the Father, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. She did not understand that concept. That our worship is to not some God, like the Samaritans saw God, but God, the Father of eternity, the Father of our spirits, the Creator of us all, one God, and we worship him as his children. But worship was also something that she needed help with. And so Jesus tells her, the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Now, I'm not trying to start a controversy here, but I took this out of context when I was younger. I thought worship the Father in spirit and in truth meant from the heart according to the Word of God. But if you look at the Gospel of John, there are common themes in the Gospel of John. And there's flesh and spirit, physical and spiritual. That's one theme. And the other theme is truth. And that's what Jesus is pointing her to. It's not heart according to the doctrine. Jesus is the truth. That's what John's Gospel is about. Jesus is the truth. They will worship the Father through Jesus. And you have to know Jesus. And God is also a spirit. We don't worship Him physically, like she's focused on the physical. Jerusalem or the mountain, he's saying it's spiritual. It's spiritual. But what is worship? Exactly, and this is sort of an interesting definition of the word. It comes from the Greek word proskuneo, which means to kiss, like a dog licking his master's hand. That's kind of odd, isn't it? But when you really think about that relationship, why does a dog kiss its master's hand? Because it understands two things. Number one, who the master is, and secondly, what the master deserves. There's a humility in what's being shown. And you notice it's also defined as to fawn or to crouch to. And we see that in Scripture. Sometimes the word worship literally means that they fell on their knee in front of somebody. They were showing obeisance. That's the way the King James words it sometimes. Or to prostrate oneself, which means literally to lay on your face. To lay on your face. So what can we, I guess, extrapolate from this idea of worship? A lot of times today, what people think is, as long as I do something for God, He'll be happy. Because it's for God. Or they'll take something very worldly, and they'll just slap the name Jesus on it and say, that's worship. That's not worship. What worship truly is, and where it begins, is with an acknowledgement that God, you are above us all, and we are beneath you. That's the idea of prostrating oneself, showing that we recognize someone who is greater than us. If our worship does not have that in mind, or it's not displaying that, it is not worship. Because worship starts with humility. I want you to imagine for a moment, if you can, try to put yourself in the position of Israel when they were in bondage. And imagine that for 400 years, your people have been in this strange land. A land that was filled with strange gods, idols, figures, foreign gods like the sun god Ra, or I can't think of the man's name now. Ptah, which was the Egyptian creator god. That's the gods they were familiar with. And some of these gods were represented to being over controlling the various elements of the world, like the rivers and the waters and frogs and the insects. And you start to get a picture of why the plagues were what the plagues were, for God to say, I am God, they are not. But you don't know God. And you know what? That's true of the Israelites. When they were in Egyptian bondage, they did not know Jehovah God. And Joshua points this out when he gives them the choice in Joshua 24. Make you a choice this day. Choose you this day who you will serve. Whether it's Jehovah or the gods that your fathers served when they were on the other side of the Red Sea. The gods they knew were the gods of Egypt. And then all of a sudden you start to get to know a different God. And you see Jehovah God, Yahweh, wage war against the gods that you've always known. And make no mistake, that's what God was doing. He was waging war against these false gods. And he won. And he leads you out with a mighty hand. And so you leave Egypt finally after God has performed all his miraculous works. The rivers turn into blood. The frogs, the lice, the hail, the lightning, the death of the firstborn, the plague on the cattle, the boils, the darkness, all those things. You witness the power of Jehovah. And not only that, as you follow him out, there's a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Do you think you'd ever forget seeing that? I don't know if that's exactly what it looked like, but whatever this pillar of fire is, you never saw that before, and now it's leading you. And that will be so ingrained in our minds, right? Everything that we had saw, everything we'd experienced, but then you feel hopeless. And you're surrounded on every side, and you think to yourself, God has just brought us out here to die. And Moses says, stand still and see the salvation of God. And God parts the sea. Not Moses, Jehovah. The seas recede back into two walls, and they pass through on dry land. I don't know if you've ever walked through the bottom of a lake after it's receded. It's not dry. But this was. God worked something that was seemingly impossible. And when they got out on the other side of the sea, what did they do? They praised Jehovah for his mighty deeds and his wonderful salvation. And you make your way down the Sinai Peninsula and gather around this great mountain, this mountain called Sinai. And they told Moses, and we talked about this the other night, they told Moses, they said, why do you always speak to God? We want to speak to God. And God speaks, and it was as a sound of thunder. And they were afraid and fearful, and they said, okay, you talk to God from now on. We don't want to talk to God ever again. And they're starting to recognize this God, he is not like any God we know. He's infallible. He is awesome. He can do anything. There is nothing that he is limited from doing. And then Moses goes up on the mountain, and he's gone for a while. And so the people begin to get antsy. And they tell Moses' brother Aaron, they said, we don't know what's happened to Moses. Make us gods. What? But it really gets worse than that. After Aaron makes the god, he says, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Really? You think that? You think that did what you just experienced? A cow? That turned the waters to blood? That sent a plague through all of Egypt to kill all the firstborn? That part of the waters? That's who you heard speak from heaven? How did they forget? How did they forget? But you know what gets worse? After Aaron makes this God and makes a declaration that this is now the God that brought them out of Egypt, Aaron, when he saw it, built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to Jehovah. Tomorrow is a feast to Jehovah the cow. That's what he's saying. And they rose early on the next day, offered burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. That word play, if you look at it, it's the same word that's translated sporting. When the ruler saw Isaac and Rebekah sporting and knew that they were not brother and sister, because that word has sexual connotations to it. God didn't ask for that. He didn't want this feast. He didn't want an image. And the question is, how do you go from knowing who God is to creating a calf? Why create a calf? Because that's what they were familiar with. In a time of uncertainty, in a time of confusion, where they had lost basically their proxy to God and Moses, they became so restless, they wanted something that was familiar to them, an image that they could look at. And then what happened after they built that image? They worshiped that image however they wanted. You know why? Because the image can't talk. The image can't do anything. It can't say, I don't want this, or I don't want that, or I want this, or I want that. It can't punish you if you disobey it. It's just a version of God that you can pretty much worship however you desire. You know, that's how a lot of people treat God today. No, we don't typically create idols. There's still many of those in the world, but we don't typically see that here in America. What we do instead is we use the language, well, my God. You ever heard that? My God. A lady told me one time after I had spoken on a Sunday morning about how God had killed Uzzah for touching the ark, she said, my God never killed anybody. And I shouldn't have said it, but I was young and had more zeal than wisdom. And I said, sister, I don't believe we serve the same God. I could have worded that better, honestly. But it's also true. She may have felt like in her mind, God is this. And I can't believe in a God that would do that. Well, listen, God is God. And it doesn't matter what you believe about him. It's not going to change who he is. He's always going to be God. And instead of us trying to make God in our image, we need to understand that we're made in his. We can't formulate a God that will just accept anything that we think is good. God is God. God deserves worship the way he asks for it. And our worship has to be a reflection not of what we like and what we desire, but of what God likes and what God desires. And it has to be a true representation of who he is. That's worship. Zechariah chapter 7, verse 5, say to all the people of the land and to the priests, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th and 7th months during those 70 years, did you really fast for me, for me? You notice this? God is challenging their motivation. He's essentially saying this. When you were in Egyptian bondage, still stuck in Egypt apparently. When you were in Babylonian captivity, and you were fasting during those 70 years, why were you doing that? Were you doing that for me? Or were you doing that for your benefit? And then God kind of puts the medicine where the pain is. He says, when you eat and when you drink, do not eat and drink for yourselves. Should you not have obeyed the words which the Lord proclaimed to the former prophets when Jerusalem and the cities were inhabited and prosperous, and the south and the lowland were inhabited? You know what he's saying? If you're really fasting for me, you'd have been doing that when life is good, not when life got hard. Oh, it's okay to fast when life gets hard. But if you were really doing it for God, you'd have been doing it when God was blessing you. The problem is, during the comfortable times and convenient times, you forgot about God, but now that I've allowed Babylon to come and take you captive, all of a sudden I'm on your radar again, and you want me to see you. That's not worship. That's selfish. That's selfish. And really it goes back to the heart of the book of Job, when Satan tells God the only reason that Job worships you is because you've put a hedge around him and you've blessed the work of his hands. In other words, God, you're only worthy to be worshipped when you give people stuff. But if you take their stuff away, they won't worship you. They'll curse you to your face. Is that true of you? That you don't think God is worthy of your worship when life is not good? You know why Job reacted the way that he did when all 10 of his kids died and one day he lost all of his wealth? Do you know why he ripped his clothes and threw dust and ash on his head and worshiped God? Because God is worthy to be worshipped, even if he gives me nothing. Because of who he is, not because of what he gives. Yes, because of what he gives, we love him. We love him because he loved us. And yes, we have a song to sing because He has given us Jesus. But even if God doesn't give us a single thing, He is worthy of our worship because God is great. Because of His mighty works and His mighty deeds, God is worthy of all of my adoration, of all of my worship. And so when it's driven by just selfishness, God sees right through that. That's not worship. You're just priming the pump. You just want more blessings. That can't be our sole motivation for worshiping God. Jesus pointed this out in Matthew 15. He said, hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Now we talked earlier about this idea of from the heart according to the Word of God. Here it is in Matthew 15. This is where that's taught. The heart must be engaged in worship. It can't just be the mouth. You know, I find myself drifting off at times. Then we sing songs that we've sung 100, maybe 1,000 times. And we know those songs. And we sing those songs. And maybe our mind, our heart just drifts off. We're just singing into the air. Where's our heart at? He said they're singing it. And it sounds honoring. But they don't mean it. They're not even thinking about it. Not only that, they have changed my will to bend to their will. So God is particular about some things when it comes to worship. And there's some cautionary tales that we get in Scripture that point us to that. In Isaiah chapter 1, God here telling His people, your new moons and your appointed feasts, my soul hates. Who is it that commanded them to keep the appointed feasts and new moons? God. God told them to do that. And they were doing it. And you know what He said? I hate it. I hate it. He said, they're a trouble to me. I'm weary of bearing them. He said, your worship is like an endurance test. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, He says, I will not hear. And then He tells them why. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. You know what God is calling them to? Repent. He said, you're willingly practicing sin. So I hate your worship. Because your life is not a reflection of what you're doing. You know, if we think that we can go Monday through Saturday and live however we want, we can live in rebellion to God, we can give ourselves over to all number of sins, and then come in here on Sunday, and we can sing praises to God, and we can focus during the prayer, and we can take communion, we can listen to the lesson, and even be impacted by the lesson, and we go, yes, we've checked our boxes off, God is happy with us because we're worshiping Him. You do not know the God you serve. If you think that about God, you do not know what you worship. That is not who God is. God is the God of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and Sunday. He's not the God of Sunday. Israel tried to play games with God, and God called them on it. He said, I'm not happy. In fact, I'd rather you not worship me than worship me if this is how you're going to treat me. God is holy. And sometimes what we do is we take the holiness of God and we decrease that standard into thinking that somehow God is going to be okay with His people being unholy. Leviticus chapter 10, 1 and 2. Then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered profane fire before the Lord, which He had not commanded. That word profane, which is translated strange in the King James, literally means not holy. That's what it means. Not holy. Profane. Common. Where did the fire come from? Doesn't matter. What matters is where it didn't come from. God lit the fire under the altar. It was holy fire. And when people offered to God, God wanted holy fire. And they just thought, fire's fire. What's it matter? You know what the irony of this story is? So fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. The very fire that they neglected, the holy fire, was the fire that devoured them. You know what we don't read of ever again in the Old Testament? Levitical priests offering strange fire before God. Because God was sending a loud message. I mean what I say. And I'm not leaving room for other options. Some have called this a positive, exclusive command. In other words, when God says, you take the fire from under the altar, it excludes anywhere else. And God doesn't have to say, don't rub sticks together, don't use flint, don't burn leaves. He just has to say, this is what I want. And if you want to approach a holy God and have Him accept your worship, we need to listen to what He says, not try to figure out what we can do that He did not say. Let's just listen to what does God want. What does God want? You know, a lot of what they did right here was right. They were in the right place. They were the right people to do it. They used the proper instruments. It was just one seemingly insignificant detail that they neglected. And God killed them. He killed them. He judged them. That's God. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Samuel goes to confront Saul because Saul has been told, as the king of Israel, Saul has been told, I want you to go to the Amalekites nation. I want you to utterly destroy them. And God was specific. Kill them all. Men, women, children, livestock. Don't take any of the spoil back. You just go and you utterly destroy them. Well, Saul and the people got there, and they came up with an idea. They said, well, let's not kill the king. Let's take the king back. And also, these livestock they're kind of pretty. I bet God would be pleased if we brought all those livestock back and we offered them to God. And the people thought that was good, and Saul said, yep, that's a good idea. And so God says to Samuel in the night, I regret making Saul king. You know what Samuel did? He cried out to the Lord all night long. He was grieved. Grieved because he had anointed Saul as king for God's instruction. And Samuel finally comes and he confronts Saul about this. And Samuel went to Saul, and Saul said to him, blessed are you in the Lord, I have performed the command of the Lord. Can you just hear the joy and the pride in his voice? He's so excited to see Samuel because he's kind of like a little kid. He wants you to come see that they clean the room. Oh, you're finally here. Guess what I did? I did exactly what God said to do. And Samuel says, then why do I hear sheep and oxen? If you did what God said, then why do I hear livestock? And what he's pointing out is, I knew what God said, and you know what God said. So don't be saying, I did what God said. Because you know what Saul says? Well, you know the people. You know the people, Samuel. They thought this was a good idea. And he starts making excuses. And finally Samuel gets his fill of it. And Samuel says to Saul, be quiet. And I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. And he said, speak on. So Samuel said, when you were little in your own eyes, were you not the head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Let's stop right there. You all ready? Thank you. Do you see what Samuel's pointing out to him? He's saying, Saul, there was a time in your life when you were very humble. Do you know that's true? When we look at Saul and we see his story, and we may often think to ourselves, man, that guy was always corrupt. No, he wasn't. Before he was king, His attitude was, I don't deserve to be king. I'm a Benjamin. I mean, I'm of the lowest of the low tribes of Israel. I don't deserve to be king. But as he ascended in power, Saul got too big for his britches. And he started wearing that king like a badge, thinking, I'm the king, I do what I want. I'm king. And Samuel said, you used to be little in your own eyes. And now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Again, using very, very specific language. Until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil, that is, take the livestock, and do evil in the sight of the Lord? You see what Samuel's doing? He's speaking truth to confront Saul's reframing of reality. Saul says, I did what God said. He said, this is evil. You disobeyed. This is evil that you've done. And Saul says, but I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on the mission of which the Lord sent me and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. You know what? This is what happens sometimes. We're confronted by a holy God about his commandments, and we just try to keep twisting and twisting and twisting and justifying and minimizing and making excuses. And that's exactly what Saul's trying to do. He's not really confronting his sinfulness. He's trying to reason with his sin. And Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? See, that's the problem. God would rather us obey him than take a loss that he doesn't want us to take. Samuel's saying, look, your intentions here are irrelevant when it's disobedient. Do intentions matter? 100%. But good intentions do not justify disobedience. And just because we think, well, God would just rather have my worship, even to the neglect and discarding of God's commandments, God is not happy. Now notice verse 23, for rebellion. Remember, Saul says, I have performed the command of the Lord. He said, no, you have sinned, you have disobeyed, you've done evil, you rebelled against God. And he said, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. That's a big deal. I'll tell you, rebellion runs rampant in our society because of our liberties. Do I enjoy our liberties? Absolutely. But do not get your Christianity and your nationalism confused. And when your nationalism becomes more guiding to the way that you display yourself and the way that you live, and you all of a sudden are trying to formulate Christianity into your nationalism, you've got a problem. Because when we start explaining scriptures through a lens of rebellion, God is not happy. God is not enabling rebellion against him or any other authority for that matter, unless that authority is trying to challenge us to rebel against God. God hates rebellion. He sees it as a wicked thing, as a sign of pride. Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord. He's finally gotten there. It took him a while, but he's finally realized, I don't have a leg to stand on. I can't justify this any longer. I didn't do what God said. I sinned against God and transgressed. And now he comes clean, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now we're getting to where the rubber meets the road. He had a choice. Make people happy or make God happy, and he couldn't do both. And Saul knew he was losing influence in Israel, so he elected to make people happy. And he tried to deny it. He tried to reframe it, but now the truth is out. And I'll tell you, that's what's happening a lot today. A lot of what we're seeing today in Christianity, it's all about making people happy, not about God. Why do we have all these programs and light shows and smoke machines and big bands? And why is all that stuff happening? Why have churches of Christ even elected to have praise teams where they get the 4 best singers in the congregation to blow everybody else out of the water? Because it's what people like. People want to hear quality. They want to hear the best. Is that what God asked for? Did God say to sing with a perfect pitch? Did He say to sing with 4-part harmony? No. We like that. God didn't ask for it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with singing in perfect pitch, by the way. But that's not what God's looking for. What God is looking for is an honest, humble display of humility and adoration to Him. We've got to ask, why do we do what we do? And when we start doing what we do because it makes people happy, even though we're disobeying God or we're ignoring clear commands of God, we find ourselves in a very similar position to King Saul. You know, it's gotten to the point where in some places you really don't even know the difference. And again, am I trying to stand up here and say, all these people are going to hell? Look, I'm not the judge. I'm just asking one simple question: why? Why? And that's a question we need to always ask ourselves. Why? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we choose to do what we do? Is it for God? Is it for ourselves? Are we just trying to please other people? A.W. Tozer said this, and I don't often quote him, but I think what he said here is phenomenally articulated. He says, worship is no longer worship when it reflects the world around us more than the Christ within us. Amen. Amen. When worship just starts looking like the rest of the world, it's not worship. Worship is different because it is sanctified or set apart holy people worshiping a set apart and holy God. It's not according to the world. We cannot look at the world and try to find out what we do in service to God. In fact, Paul said this in Galatians 1. For am I not seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? Now listen to this closely. If I were still trying to please man, I would not be the servant of Christ. If we do what we do for the approval of people, we are not serving Christ. Look, we're to edify each other. We're to be careful with one another. We're to love one another, consider one another, forbear one another, be kind, be meek to each other. But when our approval by man overrides our wanting to be approved by God, we put ourselves in a very, very dangerous spot. We cannot care more about what people think than what God thinks. So, when we gather for worship, why do you do what you do? Why do you do what you do? Is it for God? Is it for other people? You say, well, I'm not sure what that means. You ever find yourself just doing what makes everybody happy? Even though maybe sometimes you just feel a conscience issue with it because you go, well, I just don't want to upset anybody. We'll just do it how people want. Sometimes what people want is wrong. And we're forced to ask the question, what does God want? And then we just do things for ourselves. And so I'm really not sure what you mean by that. Well, let me explain it this way. Years ago, James Ludicky and I were sitting in a hotel room right outside of Lubbock, Texas. We were having a conversation about worship. And y'all know James Ludicky. Okay, so I would characterize James as an old soul. He's an old soul. I told him, you've always been an old man all your life, right? He's younger than me. In some ways, he's more mature than me, especially in his demeanor. And we were talking about the various differences between the old songs and the new songs. And we're not having a debate, we're just having a discussion. And he says to me, well, brother, tell me, which song out of these newer songs really impacts your heart? And at the time, it was a song that's in this book called Oh, the Blood. And he said, well, tell me, why does that impact your heart? So I explained it to him because I see that those are really powerful lyrics. He said, I can understand why that would really impact you. And I said, well, what is it for you? I said, you like the old songs. What old song just really impacts James Ludicky? You know what he said? Beyond This Land of Party. And I laughed. And I said, that's your song? And James, very kindly and humbly, as James does, looked at me and said, brother, have you never really considered the message of that song? And in that moment, I realized something. I hadn't. I've been singing it since I was, born. And so we started talking about the words of that song. I want to tell you something. The next time I sung that song in church, I was brought to tears. And it was the first time I saw it. You know, I've sung it a bunch. You know what he was always worried about? The notes, the rhythm, the harmony, and whether or not I liked the notes and the rhythm and the harmony, or whether somebody was leading the song too slow, or too low, or too fast, or too hot, or whether or not I liked the song they were leading. Look, get over yourself. A lot of times that's what we do. We come in here and we're dissatisfied with the impact of the assembly because we're so self-absorbed, we're upset that somebody didn't meet our preference. They're not supposed to. They're not supposed to. See, when all of our attention is on God, and we all worship God in true spirit and in truth, and we're adoring God, edification is a byproduct. It's a byproduct. We will be edified. But if we're sitting there thinking about ourselves and how somebody violated my flavor, you're not worshiping God anyway. You're just too busy about everybody else bending to your will. Look, I love it. I get chills when all four parts are just there together at the same volume and all the pitch is right. That gives me chills. I'm not sure God could not care any less. He's more concerned that we're pouring out our passionate praises from the heart. I want to leave you with one last passage today. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. Peter writes, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, that is a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, his own special people. You know what he starts with? Our identity in Jesus Christ. Think about who you are. What do priests do? They make offerings. What kind of offerings? Holy offerings. In response to what? Them being purchased and set apart by God. Listen, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Our job as the church is to proclaim the excellencies of our God. I read this one day and I had a thought, and I want to share that thought with you as we close. Some people, the only picture of God that they're ever going to get in their life is you. You are the light. Now this is the thought that I had. What if people watched the way that I worship God and then they determined how great God was? Through my worship, how great would they see God? Something to think about. Do you honestly think when we're around the throne of heaven that people are going to be bored? that they're going to say, "No, I just really don't feel like singing." That they're going to sit there and they're going to sing monotonely and without energy and passion. Do you think that's what's going to happen when we're in the presence of God? You say, "Well, no, but we're not in the presence of God." That's right. God is in our presence. Look, we don't live in the presence. God doesn't live in our presence. We live in His. God is always present. God is going to be no greater on the day that we see Him than He is right now, this moment. And that's what God's looking for us to see Him and worship Him in response to what we understand and what we see in God and about God. God is worthy of our passionate praises right now, today, in Coleman, Oklahoma, whether we see Him or not. That's worship. It's about God's greatness. And I'll tell you, the way we worship is going to impact everyone around us. Be the light. Worship God, not yourselves. I told you I'm excited to get home, but I'm not in a hurry. If you haven't eaten this afternoon, maybe you've been thinking all week long about yourself and about what you need to do to get right with God. And listen, if that's been on your heart and on your mind, we want to give you one more opportunity to come to Jesus. Whether that's to obey the gospel or for some struggle that you're experiencing. I'll tell you, you may feel very tentative about doing that, but I promise you won't regret it if you do. You will be blessed. And that's why we offer the invitation. We ask you to come, have a seat on the front as we stand together and sing.